because of the kind of writing I do and that there is a magical realist transformative element to it. I'm not necessarily writing a factual memoir, so I'm very respectful and I admire those memoirists who do that and do that brilliantly. But my writing, for various reasons, has to be something else. And part of that is because I've grown up with these memories of places I've never been to, things I've never seen. What do you do with that?
Hello and welcome to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. I'm Sonia Falero, and today I'm joined by Davina Quinlivan, a writer whose work resists easy description, which, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most interesting things you can say about a writer. Davina is the author of Shalimar, A Story of Place and Migration, a book that's part family memoir, part nature writing, part something entirely its own, a lyrical exploration of belonging, diaspora, and what it means to inherit a history. Her parents came to England as teenagers from colonial Burma and India, and that inheritance of place, of loss, runs through everything she writes. Her second memoir, Possessions, a memoir of transformation in an era of precarity, came out in January this year. It takes on something close to home for many writers: the precarity of academic life, the costs of fitting yourself into institutional categories, and what gets lost or found along the way. But what I find most compelling about Davina is this idea she describes as imaginative memoir. Memoir rooted in lived experience, but one that opens what she calls a threshold between the real and the unreal. Welcome, Davina. I want to start with something very much in the calendar. We are approaching the anniversary of the 1988 uprising, that extraordinary moment when students, monks, and civilians across Myanmar rose up against military rule in August of that year. It was, of course, brutally suppressed, but it remains a touchstone for Burmese identity and resistance, and its echoes are still being felt today with the ongoing conflict. Do you see those events as part of your story?
So what I'd like to add there is that my maternal grandfather was there on that day, Lewis Benjamin Duncan, and he was there on that day. So he passed away a long time ago, around about 1993 or something like that, but he was in the Burmese army.
That is an extraordinary piece of family history. How did that story come down to you?
So the role of storytelling is very important to my life, and I've ended up taking it in a particular direction through creative writing. But of course, my only understanding of Burmese history in particular is through the information and facts or memories my family have passed down to me. Of course, not everyone's going to be speaking about these things openly and frequently. Of course, it pops up in various conversations or not at all for a really long time. So I heard from a few family members, and my uncle, my mother's brother, gave me quite a bit of information. I also have some documents which I talk about in Shalimar more specifically. So I do have some of the documents and family history which can take me on a breadcrumb trail.
I love that breadcrumb trail. Speaking of stories and passing them down, you brought your children to the studio today. So I'm really interested to know, how do you pass those stories on to them?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to have a sense of facts and knowledge, dates and things like that. But that's very much as parallel to deeply felt memory experience, lived experience, embodied memory, feeling, which is not really very easy to put into words. So my job, perhaps as a writer, is to try to conjure that and make that a reality and a living reality for them and for anyone who reads the writing, so that it's real and fluent within the air we are breathing now, rather than being an objective fact or something lost to an archive or a past. That's probably a bit of a convoluted answer, but because of, as you said in your introduction, because of the kind of writing I do and that there is a magical realist transformative element to it, I'm not necessarily writing a factual memoir, or my writing isn't pure non-fiction, creative non-fiction. So I'm very respectful and I admire those memoirists who do that and do that brilliantly. But my writing, for various reasons, has to be something else. And part of that is because I've grown up with these memories of places I've never been to, things I've never seen. What do you do with that?
Thank you. Now, one of the things that I love about this podcast is that we have access to an extraordinary archive. Writers talking honestly and often unexpectedly about the realities of the writing life. It's a much richer picture than you often get from the standard author interview. So what we're going to do, Davina, is dip into the archive right now with a clip from Lauren J. Joseph, who is talking about her reading life and reading habits.
I have always described myself as a charity shop reader. Perhaps not a pretty marker, but an accurate one. Until I signed my first real book deal, I was honestly just too broke to buy more than 1 or 2 new books a year. And those were usually books by authors I was already familiar with. I was risk-averse, and damned if I would chance $18.99 on a hardback by an unknown, blurb to hyperbole though it may be. Not me, I preferred to keep disappointment squarely within the limits of my love life. For literature, I wanted ballast and stimulus, much more than novelty or the rush of feeling that I was part of the contemporary world. Sadly, I already felt as though I were part of the contemporary world, so I scoured the shelves of every charity shop I passed, looking to invest my meagre lucre wisely. The thrill of finding one of those classics of world literature in a British Heart Foundation is a mild one, but a sweet one. I discovered a heavily annotated Madame Bovary in a charity shop. In a budding grove, too. Books which I might have fondled in foils, but would likely have left without paying for. 4 for £1 is a most encouraging mantra. Of course, it's more than just the economy of shopping secondhand that appeals. There's also that signature RSPCA approach to stocking the shelves, which leads to all kinds of wondrous discoveries. Often you'll be eye to eye with 75 Maeve Binchys, thinking yourself out of luck when, ta-da, you strike upon an absolute gem. Betty Davis's autobiography, say, or Bomb-Proof Your Horse. Building a library, like so, hasn't made me the most up-to-date of readers, but it has given me a diversity of material to draw from, both in terms of style and form. It has also helped me to remain present, awake to the possibilities of the moment, a quality which a writer's life of plotting in isolation often lacks. I owe my love of writers like Graham Greene and Edith Wharton, authors who have fallen out of fashion but have nourished me greatly, to these grab-bag reading habits. They are the kind of books you find readily for 50 pence at the Cats Protection League, though I doubt if I would have ever sought them out. Thankfully, I do now have enough disposable income to go wild and buy the books I want to read, rather than just those I can afford. Where I had gaps in my reading, it was mainly literary fiction, which I admit was a liability, writing as I do, literary fiction. I ask for recommendations and I scan reviews. I try to read what my peers are reading now, more diligently. If I'm in a pinch, I can usually blag a proof, potentially the singular advantage of being a writer. All of which has been a real liberation, but don't think I've left Bernardo's behind. No, I'm still rifling amongst the celebrity cookbooks in search of the next lost classic. Come, join me.
Wonderful, Lauren J. Joseph on her reading habits and reading life. I'm curious about how that lands with you, Davina, because you have spoken of growing up in a house without books.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that and how that built into the writing life that you have currently?
So perhaps I could answer that in 2 parts. So first of all, responding to that clip, I really identify with that sense of rifling through charity shops, trying to find things. What I've really loved about that is discovering old books that have handwritten notes in them. Sometimes there's a postcard lodged in the pages. The thing of like the book as a material object, we read on Kindles and things like that now. But like finding a book that's been read and it's been loved, or a bit has been passed on and at some point it's ended up in the charity shop. I really love that, and I've got quite a lot of things. And also, it's really, as we heard, if you keep up to date and you buy literary fiction, you'll probably run out of a lot of money, because to keep up to date with, there's a lot of books that are released every week, and I get review copies and things like that. But it's really expensive. So yeah, I have quite a lot of those, and some of them are old Penguin paperbacks.
Oh, those are wonderful.
Yeah, and some of them, like old celebrity cookbooks and things like that. And then the second part of your question, growing up in a house without any books. I think it's quite a sad comment, and when I hear it spoken like that, I feel a bit sort of like, oh, that's quite sad. But I didn't feel sad at the time, so I didn't really feel as though I was deprived of books per se. I had a few books, and I liked going to the library, but my parents were not necessarily keen readers. We didn't have a bookcase. My parents didn't really read books at all. My dad read the daily tabloids, Daily Mirror and The Sun, unfortunately. So he would check those out. So how did that affect my writing life? Well, in some ways, it gives you a deeper sense of autonomy and agency, in that you choose what you're going to read. There's lots of other authors and writers who've spoken about this, perhaps growing up in a place where you have less books, or some people may have parents, family members who really encourage certain types of reading, certain types of choices. But that was not a conversation we ever had. So I could pick up anything, and literally anything, and they wouldn't really have an opinion. So I could go and seek out things in the local library and just go and get them. That's a conversation about class, about identity, kind of access my parents might have had to stories and to books. Not quite sure what they would have read as children, probably very little. Mm-hmm. But then that also impacts on how I might carry that weight, that burden with my own children or family members, and encouraging them to read things. I think it should just feel natural to want to look at something, and if you're not fussed or bothered, then you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I find that a lot of writers, when you ask them how they found their way to writing books, they start by saying, well, I grew up in a house full of books. I was always surrounded by books. That was just the language of conversation. It's so intriguing and so profound that was definitely not the case for you. And somehow, to me, certainly makes your journey seem even more impressive. So if you did not have books around you, and your parents were not terrific readers, how did you find your way to books? Who took you to the library the first time?
So the Hayes Library, Hayes in Middlesex, where I grew up, I haven't been there in a while, but that was the local library. I didn't really go avidly. I can't really say. I've heard lots of stories, and there's wonderful stories about people who discovered the library and then they're there every day. Unfortunately, I didn't really do that, but I loved cinema, which I've spent a long career teaching for 20 years, and also theatre as well. So I'd pick up scripts, screenplays, all those sort of things too. I found an old screenplay by Michael Ondaatje of The English Patient in a second-hand charity shop in Ealing, probably around the sort of, the movie came out in 97, so sort of like early 2000s, and I've still got that. Plays as well, published by Faber. It becomes more deliberate as one gets older, and then you have more access to the wider world once you leave school, once you go to university. But it still could be anything. It's just everything is out there.
It's the National Year of Reading. How do you see that playing into how we talk about books in our everyday conversations? Obviously, as parents, to our kids, but also as writers, as educators. What is the message that we could be giving out?
Yeah, I think if we could keep working on the idea of thinking about our relationship with books and what books mean to us, and to celebrate stories, to celebrate the content of those stories as well, diverse content, in other words, but also the sharing of those books in communities, and to get literature sort of physically out there, to share books, to giving someone a book, I think, is the greatest thing, and being able to gift things or remembering someone through a book is really lovely. And I think that perhaps in our age of technology and devices, we forget that actually it's so lovely having something to hold and to write in and to pass on. And that person will remember that, even if they thought, well, I don't really want to read that, but thanks anyway. They'll remember that and they might come to it in their own time. And also to not be ashamed or embarrassed about any of the whatever gives you joy, whatever you love, to share that and to find yourself through those books and to find ways to access self-knowledge and all those things, just like any other form of art. And so one of the organisations I've been working with, which is an Arts Council England NPO, Paper Nations, which is a creative writing incubator, does a lot of work with communities. And we have something where we focus on reading and the importance of book clubs and things like that. And I really love that, because at the end of Possessions, I really do speak strongly about the role of community in storytelling and getting out there, and it's about interconnectedness and not being on our own through stories, which is, I guess, what we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Community through reading, through sharing our stories.
Yeah.
So read a book, buy a book.
Yeah.
From anywhere, really. I also want to talk to you about the actual making of your work, because the way you write is genuinely unusual. You've described your work, the latest book, as imaginative memoir, in which you're working with real experience, real people, real history, but you allow the writing to world build, to move into what you call a threshold space between the real and the unreal. Can you talk me through what that means in a practical sense?
Yes, so it's important for me to think about how those stark realities, or the realities I describe in my storytelling, can be transformed or can be mediated through a more imaginary context, and to understand the power of imagination when I have often felt isolated or alone, or wanting to draw on the love I must have experienced as a child, especially with Shalimar, which is dedicated to all my family, because most of them are gone. The role of the magical realism, as it were, or the creating of this sort of world building, is to engage with these concerns around migration and mythology and this magical transformation as an urgent process of catharsis, or maybe of trying to strive towards some sort of healing language. I'm not saying that it's a healing gesture and that everything is resolved and processed through this, but it just feels vital, and it's an innate part of the writing to do that. Like in Shalimar, I'm able to send my dad back to India in the water, and I say, go back to the veranda, and your dog is waiting for you on the veranda. Look that scratchy haired dog, and please go back, because his childhood was cut very short. So was my mum's, because of the war. He was born in 1937 and my mum was born in 1940. So while he died in 2008, and I write Shalimar around about sort of 2020, it was really important, really powerful for me to be able to do that, and to think, I can do that here in this space as a writer. And I need to do that, and it's the only way I can do that, to say goodbye. And I wrote it in one go. I don't think I even went back to it. And it just felt like a necessary action for me, but also I think in being able to understand the act of writing or creativity as transformative, and also a kind of activism as well, in that there's a wider kind of social issue here, because of the impact of colonialism and capitalism and climate change, especially in the second book. It's an act that I have to do that feels necessary and vital at the time, and I hope that readers will also recognise that in the writing, will recognise that it's almost like you think that you've hit a brick wall, but by enacting that kind of transformative writing, you actually remove all those walls. So it's a sense of empowerment and to take back control, or perhaps to put it another way, to be able to see all of time and space kind of collapsing, and you can explore things, interrogate them in your own way, and to give them to do justice to them. I think it's really important for my dad to go back to India, because he never went back. He never went back to Burma. He never went back to India. So I could do that for him in the art making process. my father also didn't get to meet my children. In Shalimar, he does turn around and he actually is my son. So I see him turning around and I say that there's this granular time slipping away and you can hear the tiger's breath at your ear, and he turns and it's the face of my eldest son. And it is that sense of kinship, of familiarity and living on. But my uncle is alive. He's 90, my mum's younger brother. So he read Shalimar. He bought Shalimar and read it. He's also about to read the second one. And I said, well, it's slightly different from the first one. Are you sure? And he keeps hunting it down in Waterstones in Exeter. And I keep saying, well, maybe you don't have to read the second one. There's a little bit more use of language in the second one. But he said, well, so what? Actually, he's really brilliant. He's a really grounded, thoughtful, gentle human being. And he was able to get to know me a bit better through Shalimar and to understand how much I loved and cared for my mum and dad, for his sister. And so, because I didn't know him particularly well, and he ended up moving to Exeter, I think largely because he'd read Shalimar and because it had brought us closer. So that for me is enough, really.
I mean, that's an extraordinary outcome, really. Thank you for sharing that. We are now living in a time where more people are talking about the impact of colonialism on their personal life, on their families. There still aren't enough stories, and the discussion still isn't large enough or doesn't go into as much detail as many of us would like. But I'm interested to know what kind of reception Shalimar got and what role you think it plays in the conversation that we are now having about colonialism and occupation.
For me, it was quite a big step to be able to discuss these things in Shalimar because I hadn't had a moment to think. In some ways, I could have done an undergraduate degree at SOAS or something like that, and I really feel like, I could have learned more. I could have spent more time learning about all of the language around colonialism, the theory, the rhetoric around that, the analysis and the critique. And I feel like I'm still learning, and I need to learn more about all of these issues. But in a very real sense and in a sort of more basic sense, it started to hit me. And I think it turns in a different way with the second book. While neither of the books are misery memoirs, I feel like I have to always say that because, when we start talking about these things, it sounds like, Davina's going to create this misery memoir and it's going to be really, really hard hitting. But actually, there's multiple things. It's very decentering. It's very disorienting. It's chaotic. There's beauty, but also ugliness in life. And speaking about colonialism across the British Empire, India and Burma in particular, because my parents had to leave. Well, Burma was occupied by the Japanese and then reclaimed in 1948, and they lived in India. And it's all very complicated, and you can't really sort of think about things in an objective way because once they start talking about that, it becomes deeply intertwined with personal experience and their lived experience. And no one's really talked to me about that because, well, they're gone now. They didn't grow up with the access to the tools and the language which we have now in the sense of how we may talk about these things with our children. So I understand the writing as being part of the conversation around colonialism, and it's important to reflect on that in the stories. I'm mixed heritage, so my great-great-grandfathers were colonials. My great-great-grandmothers were indigenous Burmese women. So there is that splitting, and that's the psychology of that, being mixed heritage in particular. And then moving towards this moment now, this wave, I think, which is occurring where writers perhaps of mixed heritage in particular can perhaps feel more comfortable to articulate a sense of love and appreciation of what I might call deep England and the England we associate with William Morris and Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and all these things, which we previously might have felt uncomfortable with. It's no coincidence that Zakia Sewell's book, Finding Albion, reaches its audience now and reaches those accolades. Or Delia Al-Dujaili's book, Babylon Albion, where she intertwines her experience of being Iraqi, but also growing up in Surrey. And in Shalimar, I spend a lot of time in Surrey. And I move further and further out of London and I enter this deep England. And in Shalimar, the Green Man seems to be a bit of a difficult figure for me, and he feels foreboding. But I make peace with him, and I continue to make peace with him because he's not foreboding anymore, and I'm happy to love the oak trees and the deep England of the Robert Macfarlane's deep England, because that's where I was born. But it takes a while for those feelings to be processed, especially when the history is so complex. But I think that's really what I do, because I write from rural England. And I think I'm writing from rural England. Both stories are based in rural England or end in rural England. And I'm looking out at sheep, at cattle. We're talking really sort of farm life here, agricultural spaces. But entering into that field, literally or metaphorically, is also the spectre of my great-great-grandmothers who are from Burma, my mum, my dad. And I've written about that.
Are you a professional writer struggling with financial difficulties? The Royal Literary Fund is here to support you. At the RLF, we believe that every writer deserves the chance to thrive, no matter what life throws your way. We offer a variety of hardship grants tailored to help professional writers in need, whether it's short-term relief or ongoing support. Perhaps you're dealing with an unexpected expense, a drop in income, or facing challenges that make writing difficult, such as illness, disability, or now relying on your pension. If you're eligible, our grants team will walk you through our discreet and confidential application process, ensuring you receive the support you need. Visit rlf.org.uk to check your eligibility and inquire today. The Royal Literary Fund. We believe writers matter because writing matters.
So Shalimar talks about migration, mythology, your family. You mentioned activism, and of course it's about colonialism and occupation and how that continues, the impact of that continues to the generations and continues to obviously impact you. And you use very interesting storytelling devices to talk about your life. In your new book, Possessions, you're telling a different story, a story that perhaps many more people in this country may feel like they can relate to. It is about navigating a career, in your case, academic life. It's about being a woman of mixed heritage in modern Britain. But again, there are storytelling devices that you use that seem to me both familiar and, with this book, a little bit different from what you've attempted before. Can you talk us through what you were trying to do in terms of craft when it came to Possessions?
A lot of it really is very instinctive. Regrettably, I don't have an MFA in creative writing, and I have never done a creative writing course. I'd love to, but I'm going at it really with gut feeling. I felt like it was really important for my great-grandmother to turn into a teak tree in Shalimar, because why not? And it was an innate kind of magical moment, which isn't just fantastical and fun and something I wanted to do on a whim, but actually it feels structurally and in the sense of the craft, it feels like this is about reclaiming, lost narratives, lost histories, lost people, and about situating them in this deep England landscape. Because while there are the teak trees and the sycamore trees and all of that in my writing, they have to kind of all exist at the same time. In my head they do anyway. Maybe I'm just a bit crazy, but like they do exist because they have to, because they're inside me. So the best way is to contain it within the story. I teach a short course on fragmentary and experimental memoir writing, creative nonfiction at the University of Bristol, and I've taught memoir elsewhere, and I teach biography and life writing. I think those more experimental and fragmentary forms allow us to capture all of those elements of ourselves. And I think there is a risk of being too broad and being too multiple and not containing it. But I really love film editing, and this is a really geeky thing to say, but I love Michael Ondaatje's book on film editing, which only the geeky people would know about, but his appreciation of non-linearity and of rhythm, and obviously he's a fantastic poet as well. It's so important to think about how we think about the linear and the non-linear and creating space in your writing and the shape shifting. In terms of craft, I would say that it's about recognizing those patterns and your perception. And I think I just felt more confident, or I've grown more, that it's up another level again. So I still feel as though Shalimar is my authentic voice and it feels right for me. But with Possessions, it's like another layer came off. So I feel like I teach my students when I say, it's like, okay, you're writing memoir, but it's not really going to get there until you start peeling back the layers, until you keep throwing off those layers, and you start off with the voice of someone else, or maybe you want to sound like Deborah Levy, or you want to sound like Ocean Vuong, or you want to sound like someone. We all do that, and eventually you tear off those layers and you get to who it is that you're trying to grapple with here. I think that element of being fearless in your writing is so important, because what have you got to lose? So when I start writing about Saint Sidwella and then my goblin ancestors, as it were, there's a lot of mythological figures, like a whole cast of folky kind of mythological figures in the book, and they're part of that landscape. And while I thought it could be a bit wild and mad to include them in the way I have, it's appropriate to me because I'm trying to work out how to express some sense of presence and debt to the past and to knowledge and to history.
That was wonderful. Thank you. And 2 great pieces of writing advice. Be fearless and take off all the layers. Tear off all the layers.
Just keep dropping them off.
Thank you so much. All right, let's take another visit into the archive. This recording is of playwright Kenny Emson talking about the key locations of his writing life. And I think it might chime with you in a few different ways. Let's hear it.
The Eastgate shopping arcade at Basildon. The words don't really conjure up an inspirational place for a writer. But as I sifted through the locations of my life that influenced my writing, this is probably the most important one. Yes, there was those heady days in Twickenham, Isleworth if we're going to get all specific, where the first embers of a career sparked. They were amazing. A smoky single room and thoughts of changing the world, I haven't, shared with a long-haired ginger sitar enthusiast who only played records released in 1967. There was Archway Bedsit with a Slovenian couple and a former backing dancer to Kylie Minogue. If ever a lesson could be learned about withholding conflict, it was there with those 3. Then my final London writing space in Finsbury Park, the cheapest flat in the whole of London town, council tax and bills included, and enough rats to populate a James Herbert trilogy. Just make sure you hold your nose as you walk through the bottom 2 floors where it smelled like something had died, been resurrected, then barbecued and left out in the sun for a week. Oh, and of course, my new of 5 years vista of Sussex, Brighton and all its hills, the downs, the sea, the murmurations, the expensive lessons in my new favourite word, bungaroosh. But Basildon is where it all started. So let me take you back, way back. The year is 1990. Football is about to go Italia. Madonna is about to release Vogue. Jason Donovan is about to get an amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Thatcher will resign. Nelson Mandela will be released. And I will be dragged around Basildon Shopping Centre every Friday night while we do The Big Shop. I'm 7, a bit shy, in a town where shyness is not a badge you wear proudly. In a town where imagination is something you hide. I've never kicked a football, that well-known harbinger of popularity. My best mate's name is Jamie. In 15 years, he'll fall through someone's roof while trying to burgle their house. But at this moment, he's a small kid with a mullet, just like me. His mum doesn't do The Big Shop at Basildon on a Friday night, though. So he's at home playing and having fun while I'm here, generally making a nuisance of myself somewhere in aisle 13, cleaning products. But this particular Friday night is unlike any other. It's where a spark of magic occurs. A portal opens to another world. Abracadabra. My mum's patience finally snaps and she orders my dad to go and do something with me. Allegedly, he might have been as helpful as I was when it came to The Big Shop. So we fled into the labyrinth-like corridors of Basildon's Eastgate Mall. A McDonald's was promised, or maybe a Pizza Hut. The details of fast food fade as a miracle was about to occur. We rode the escalator up past CNA, took a left at Habitat, then made a dash for the galleries. A collection of small independent shops housed in tiny little windowed spaces. In another life, this is Covent Garden, De Wallen, Greenwich Village, some cool place in Berlin where people are doing weird theatre. My dad, who, let's be honest, is really on a mission to tire me out with all these stairs and not actually going shopping, sees something in the corner of his eye. There's a glint, One of those fires that's lights in someone. I can still see it now. His face. Time, that shapeshifter, has swapped it for the one he wore when he was a child. Should we go and have a look in there? The small unit didn't even have a proper sign, just a selection of the latest comics pressed up against the window. Next to them, figurines of superheroes. Toys, so many toys. Little did I know they would be the least interesting thing in here. We stepped inside. The air was heavy, musty, male. Every single space in the small room seemed to be occupied. Comics stacked to the ceiling, shelves spilling out, the altar of dead trees all around us. Sacrifice to the art of narrative, of time travel, of exploring and magic and mysticism and heroism, and we weren't in Basildon anymore, Toto. My hands sifted through the cellophane-covered comics, that clinical feel of protection, keeping all those stories safe from prying, greasy hands, keeping those worlds and lives intact, marking them out from the cold Essex world of concrete and hardness, where shyness was a disease, where the horizon was the Ford factory, the Shell refinery, or the docks. All good, hard-working jobs, ready to break the dreams of other shy boys like me. The ones posh people in this industry of letters romanticise. Expect your parents to have too. Noble toil. Every Friday brings an escape from that world now. An escape from that life. We skip up the escalators, two kids both whittering about what we might find this week. What new chapter could be hidden in those dusty rows? What treasure might be tucked round the back of one of those badly organised bookcases? We're on first-name terms with the owner now, John. 20 years later, he'll send me a copy of a version of Peter Pan that he's written. I hope he understands, that he gets it. That when we walked into that little comic book shop all those years ago, he took us both to Never Neverland. He opened the door for us to a place where we could always remain children, where we never needed to grow up, let our hearts become hard. It's where it started, my love of stories, in a shitty Basildon shopping mall. And when I need to remind myself why I do this job, when the words feel heavy, the ideas empty, it's where I think of. To try and replicate that feeling that I had all those years ago, that moment of discovery, of endless possibility, of freedom, a stolen moment of time from the universe.
Some very beautiful and personal writing from Kenny Empson talking about the Basildon shopping centre. Not exactly a place associated with literary inspiration, he says, and yet it clearly fed his writing.
Yeah.
What did you feel when you heard that piece?
Yeah, I really loved that. I loved his reference to portals and to the Wizard of Oz and Neverland and these kind of magical things which happen in very mundane and non-magical places, and it really resonated with me. And I think there's something really powerful in what he said about childhood as well, and being able to hold on to those elements of your childhood or the inner child. And as I was listening to that, I was thinking that maybe it's a psychological place of safety for me to be able to write and to have that space which allows me to interrogate things and to explore things, not only maybe try to rework or rethink things, but actually just to kind of have time to think. This is about time. It's about reflection on that. But the wildness of that and all the transformations, it made me think of like the writing of like Jeff Young, who's a brilliant memoirist who also has this kind of hallucinogenic, kind of trippy feeling through his writing, or the stream of consciousness, where he's writing about Liverpool, but also there's this sort of like psychotropic element where like there's these wild things happening. I had a chat with him recently, and I said, well, I don't really know what to call the writing I'm doing, which is how we started this interview. And we've used that kind of that holding term, imaginative memoir. And I think Jeff does something perhaps a little bit similar, but he just, I don't know, it's, it's like stream of consciousness. You have to just sort of, things happen, and then these kind of, for me, the patron saint of Exeter kind of trots through the door, or the ancestors are there and they're talking to me, and why not? And just lean into it. And that is how the storytelling unfolds, but also like the mundane everydayness of the Basildon shopping centre. I think I love the contrast. That goes back to a little bit around craft and the light and the shadow. I'm not trying to write Game of Thrones or anything like that. I don't really know very much about fantasy writing at all, but the idea of using that term world building is that there is this world that is clearly present and real, pulsing through my life. And so it's about communicating that and once I write it, then it feels much more validated through that. But in being a non-realist as well, I think that also helps you to keep a grip on where you are and to be groundedness and to navigate life.
Kenny Amson's piece made me think of something your dad said, which you talk about in Possessions, where he talks about loafing to describe the work I undertook outside of campus. Even after he's gone, he's long gone, you're right, I go around with the word loafer in my head, arguing with my dad's ghost as I sit on the train. There's just some wonderful piece here where you're talking about chit-chatting with your dad, but really this idea of loafing and your time being your own and you feeling a sense of power and privilege and freedom to just do as you will and to allow yourself to daydream and to think and therefore ultimately to write.
To write, yeah.
It comes across so beautifully.
I would definitely describe myself as a sort of place-based writer. Sometimes I've done things at travel writing festivals, or I've done stuff on the sense of, place is really important to my writing, but also I would say time is really important to my writing. Yeah, because I explore, interrogate a lot of different experiences of time in the book. Like I talk about cosmological time and colonial time, and I try to unpick it, and I talk about it being this kind of fabric that we're trying to unpick. But also, like ancient time and like the time we may have associated with harvesting, and looking out my window, I'm thinking about the moon and the phases of the moon. And all of those times are colliding and they coexist in the writing. But I think because I have this narrow sense of the hook, as it were, or like when you try to write a pitch and you're saying, well, what is this book about? The through line is that this is about transformative writing and about this moment of there's no genre really, but it's about these struggles through precarity, motherhood, and all those things. But yeah, time and space. And there's some references to sci-fi in the book. There's references to Sonic the Hedgehog. So I noticed that, an online job interview, I'd done about 30 or 40 of those in the space of 1 year. And it became quite absurd. There's quite a lot of, I would say as well, there's some comedy in the book. I put the comedy in there because that's probably me. Some of it is a little bit dark. But it does feel like really absurd, really like crazy. That's why we've got titles like Academic Barbie and Floppy Cats, which refers to like the cats that some of the male professors would bring in to Zooms, and I'd have my children downstairs and I'd be like, why are the cats in the Zoom? So yeah, the average time of a job interview online is usually the same amount of time that it would take to play the entire game of Sonic the Hedgehog, which you can look at on YouTube, and it's 45 minutes long. And it felt like there's a chapter called Golden Rings, which is the job interview chapter. And I just had to really get that in because I'd just done so many interviews. I think that will resonate with anyone who's going through that. My interviews were mainly about, were within academia. And there is a lot of absurdity around that. When people say, well, the weather's nice, but how will we know? Because we're all in different possible time zones or different places around the UK, and we're not breathing the same air. So what was exactly going on here? And I just wanted to sort of it's not a misery memoir, but I would want to kind of bear witness to that, because I don't think that many people are talking about this, pushing us out of our bodies and going online, and we're losing ourselves, our sense of selves and presentness.
It's definitely not a misery memoir.
Yeah.
I thought it was really funny in lots of parts. Very introspective, so very sharp, so incredibly thoughtful, and just delightful, really. So no, not a misery memoir at all. But you do talk about precarity, which is something that all writers and academics as well have to deal with given the institutions in which we work. One of the things that you've talked about is receiving a grant from the Royal Literary Fund. Because writers do tend to find it hard to ask for help or feel some sort of stigma around funding applications, can you tell us how the grant was useful to you, and what advice would you give to anybody who is maybe thinking about applying but is burdened by doubt?
Yeah, I'm extremely grateful for that grant. I'd read about it and I'd seen some reels on social media, and I honestly felt like this wasn't something that I could apply for. I didn't feel like I was an appropriate applicant, I was looking at all the people that were associated with the RLF and, very esteemed writers. And it's still quite an odd thing to call myself a writer, even though I have 2 books before us here today. But I was still coming to terms with that. I think that's probably quite a common thing. But I thought I'll just spend some time and I'll apply, because why not? And it was a really difficult time. And so I was experiencing quite a lot of precarity. I support my family, and I found everyone associated with the RLF and the people I spoke to incredibly helpful. They had the time for me. We had lots of phone conversations. I would say that the grant has been very transformative, because it just gave me the peace of mind to be able to think about the next steps and to think about how I get more work. I'm self-employed, so I needed to plan things. I needed to work out what to do, and it was a very, very critical moment last year. And also the validation of being recognised as an author as well, which I still find quite strange, and then having conversations with others about that. So anyone who wants to apply, I think, do not feel put off by anything or by any ideas you may have about whether you're valid or not as a writer, or whether your application would be valid. It's been hugely important, and it does play a large part in our everyday expenditure and in what we need to do to survive.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I couldn't agree more. Now, here is Anne Morgan with the latest RLF news.
A thriller featuring an AI detective and a memoir of a childhood on a once grand country estate are among the latest titles to appear from Royal Literary Fund Fellows. Tony White's novel Phantom at the Feast sees Detective Sergeant Rex King obliged to work alongside the National Crime Agency's unsettlingly brilliant new AI in an attempt to solve the murder of the sole witness in a trafficking case. It has been published by No Exit Press. Meanwhile, from Salt Publishing, Katie Grant's Clinging to the Crags documents the author's eccentric childhood in the depths of blustery Lancashire, among the ruins of one of Britain's great estates. It offers a tale of a family that defies understanding, not just because of the vivid personalities involved, but also because of society's continuing and obsessive concern for male primogeniture. For more information, visit the publishers' websites. A handbook on sewing and the Firth of Forth are among the recent sources of inspiration for the Royal Literary Fund's poets. Jackie Will's new collection, Making the Wedding Dress, also published by Salt, gives readers the exceptional at the heart of daily life. Through the process of making her daughter's wedding dress, Wills explores the disturbing intimacy of needlework, as well as the discoveries of ageing and the consolations and concerns of the natural world. By contrast, Gary Mackenzie's Firth takes a tidal estuary as its starting point. A formerly restless collection, moving from haiku and prose poem sequences to long works on glaciers and oysters, this book intermingles human and non-human perspectives. It is published by the Irish Pages Press. An RLF Fellows book about Mount Etna will be serialised on BBC Radio 4 this month. Helena Attlee's The Fire in the Mountain will be the Radio 4 Book of the Week from Monday the 10th of August. Combining travel writing with history, mythology, geology, gastronomy and horticulture, Attlee tells a unique story of life in the shadow of Sicily's most dangerous and alluring landmark, and offers a powerful meditation on humanity's ever-changing relationship with landscape. The Fire in the Mountain will be available to listen on BBC Sounds. And finally, a discussion about editing and a consideration of how writing changes the writer will form the basis of the next 2 RLF Collected Live events. At 7:30pm on Monday the 3rd of August, Collected Books in Durham will host poet and editor Joe Clement, novelist Zoe Marriott, and playwright and poet Harry Mann, as they tackle the question of how much writers should trim and shape their work. This light-hearted event, full of insights from across the world of novels, plays, short stories and poetry, will be followed by a Q&A and is for anyone curious about the editing process. Tickets are £5 and can be booked through collectedbooks.co.uk. Then, at 2 p.m. on Thursday the 27th of August, poetry and flash non-fiction author Rebecca Tantony, film, television, radio and theatre writer Robin Mukherjee, and critically acclaimed biographer Franny Moyle will gather at Stroud Library to explore the question, how does writing change the writer? Their conversation and readings will also be followed by an opportunity for audience questions and discussion. Tickets are £3 and can be booked through the Gloucestershire Library's website. And now, back to the studio.
Davina, thank you so much. This has been a really rich conversation. Possessions, a memoir of transformation in an era of precarity, is out now from September Publishing. I recommend it to our listeners warmly. If today's conversation has sparked anything for you, a thought, a question, a piece of writing you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us using the hashtag #RLFcollected. And if you have writing questions you'd like to hear RLF Fellows discuss on a future episode, please do get in touch. Until next time, thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Collected, the podcast about writing from the Royal Literary Fund. If you'd like to share any comments or questions, please use the hashtag #RLFcollected on our social media channels. The music was composed by Andy Glenn. There was research by Nicola Baldwin and post-production by James Robertson. Our producer was Anne Morgan.